Welcome to another episode of the SparkCom podcast. How are you doing today, Adam?
I'm doing great, Manny. How are you?
Doing very well, we're reminded as human beings on this earth every day by what's going on in the world around us, particularly things like COVID and all the things on the market, the upcoming election. We're constantly reminded that we're members of this earth, correct?
Yeah. Did you see this week that there was an asteroid that missed the planet by 1,360 kilometers or miles, and they almost didn't see it? They saw it only after it passed the Earth?
Yeah, I did.
Reminds you that we're just a dot out there, huh?
We're just a dot. And, innovation is something that is, and especially disruptive innovation, that comes into play in different forms, right? We talk about the four major trends, and there's a bunch of, minor trends, and trend following is a big deal, understanding where the market is going. And so we have a very special guest today that we're going to speak with that ties in a little bit of kind of what you mentioned with this asteroid and what I mentioned about being on this earth. His name is Taber MacCallum. He is the co-CEO and founder of a company called the Space Perspective, a human spaceflight company that is taking people on payloads to the edge of space using high altitude balloons. So he's chairman of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, and he co-founded Worldview Enterprises here locally in Tucson. I've known Taber for many years and have really been fascinated by his story. So I'd like to bring him on board and start the conversation on how he sees the future of this brand new market, being that of taking basically a vacation into near space. So with that, good timing. Good morning to you, Taber. How are you?
Good morning. Doing great. How are you doing?
Excellent. I just gave your brief introduction, and we're talking a little bit today about, we're here on Earth, and of course, COVID is in front of us all the time. On sort of the negative side. On the positive side, we're surrounded by lots of beautiful things and things like trends, which we talk about a lot on the show. And I wanted to bring you on the show to talk a little bit and understand from your perspective where the trend for space tourism is going, and just get your thoughts globally here. Adam Hartung is also on the line and is going to be asking some questions and getting some thoughts.
Awesome. Hi, Adam.
Hi.
Well, so, space tourism is obviously sort of an extension of commercial space. The idea for commercial space is as old as science fiction, right? Everybody wrote about, people's private spacecraft and private companies going to the moon and things like that. What's really making it's been like an overnight success that took 30 years. To happen, but of course we see SpaceX now carrying people and talking about space tourism and very actively working space tourism. We had an IPO with Virgin. Blue Origin's been working on their offering, and so it's coming real. People are buying tickets to go to space, and where Space Perspective comes in is that all of those are very expensive rocket rides, especially going to there is an absolute need for sort of a lower level and much more accessible way to get to the edge of space and see what astronauts talk about, see the curvature of the Earth in the black sky, the Earth in the context of space, and that's a really valuable experience that I think is also an experience that a lot of people should have. You imagine if every school had a teacher that had been to the edge of space and could talk about that firsthand to inspire kids. So there's a lot of things we can do if we can make access to space much easier.
I'd like you to expand on that. We talk a lot about how important it is for entrepreneurs to understand undermet or unmet needs. And successful entrepreneurs are the ones who identify the needs and then come up with a value delivery system to make it happen. I'm still not really clear on what the unmet or undermet need is that you're targeting. And I say that because it's never occurred to me to even, I've never had an interest to go to space. So I'm an uninformed person, and I could be helped here.
Well, you know, when Apple came out and started making this thing called an iPhone, Jobs said, people don't know what they want. I know what they want. So I would somewhat challenge the idea that identifying an unmet need that is sort of identified by other people is necessarily the primary ingredient, though it's a classic one, obviously. More fundamentally, a lot of people want to go to space. It's really interesting. So I, a bit like you, said, is it just because I've been in the space industry for 30 odd years and I've been drinking all the Kool-Aid, and that's why I think there's a market. So we had a top tier market research firm do an independent study for us. We asked them not to use any of their space people, but to purely tourism side of the house out of Zurich, and they came back with a huge market. And it's born out of unique tourism that people are buying experiences now much more than objects, that people want experiences that they can have with their family and friends. And the general trend towards ecotourism is signified in that, and a lot of very high-end tourism. The high-end tourism market is growing, if you take this parenthetical moment of COVID out, tremendously. So these are high-end safaris to Africa and fly around type trips at a very high price point. So the need is for the next new experience, the next place to go. Quite literally, the world is running out of places to go.
Well, it's fantastic that you were able to go do a deeper dive into those needs. And again, not everybody has to have an unmet need. If you find a market, though, that's what's important. A lot of our listeners and watchers are entrepreneurs, people getting started in new businesses. Give them a flavor. So that study you did sounded like it really helped you make some good decisions and get yourself started. How much did you have to spend on that study to get this better understanding of the needs that customers have?
Well, you can spend as much money on studies as you dare to pay.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm not going to say how much the study cost us. It was less than years. You pay huge amounts. I think what a study does for you is helps you identify if you have built-in bias that you and so always as an entrepreneur you want to challenge yourself and around yourself where your biases and assumptions are being challenged. And so by going to an outside group, you can really have someone who doesn't have a stake in this examine what you're saying. So now that could be a group of friends and experts that you pay for a weekend at a ranch or something, or it doesn't have to be a high-end name firm. That's useful when you're going to the investment community and saying, see, I have independent confirmation. And that's very, I think, case dependent about whether or not you need to do that. But the fundamental premise of have you set up a situation where skeptics have challenged your ideas is a really foundational step to take.
So I like how you used this study of needs. You came up with a value proposition around tourism and space tourism. Where did the value delivery system, this ballooning, how did that come about, that you come up with that approach to deliver the value to your potential customers?
Well, there's never any new ideas in this world. This is actually a pretty human ballooning flight in the 30s. I mean, the first person to go above 50,000 feet into the stratosphere was actually in a balloon. And stratospheric ballooning has sort of continued from then. The idea of tourism through stratospheric ballooning has been around for a while. And actually, we started Worldview to do that before Worldview pivoted to doing uncrewed or systems. Which is another story. What's special is a confluence of enabling technologies. Battery power, composite structure power, efficient motors, laminates that make the balloon easier to manufacture and stronger. It's really that we've seen a number of technologies come to fruition that put together enable larger systems like balloon-based edge of space tourism to occur. Very similar to altitude control system that Worldview does. It had the same basic issue. The idea of altitude control was old, but the technology wasn't there.
You know, Adam, I don't know if you know this, but I have a little bit of a background in high altitude airships as well, or ballooning. I worked for a little time for a company out of Las Vegas that was working on some high altitude airships. And it's interesting, some of the markets that we were going after, this was back in the 2005 timeframe, was in part a constellation of Stratollites that would be across the US, so that instead of satellites, you would lower down the balloon, change out the equipment, and then raise it up again. And, in that sense, that would enable higher, basically more coverage for telecommunications and all of that. I mean, of course, this is 2005, so I think I might have had a BlackBerry, but I don't even remember. I mean, it's a long time ago. But what we talk about trends, Taber, and one of the big trends that we talk about is essentially mobility and enabling that. And so, having a more robust communication systems always enables that, right? Along the list of all these things, including harebrained ideas like a casino up in the sky above any sort of laws, persistent surveillance for things like, military, of course, but things like, natural disasters. At the time, tourism was kind of low in the list of where we're going after. And the reason why, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Taber, was the cost structure was not supportive of a larger market, right? I looked this morning, and I guess you could take a ride on the Soyuz up to the space station for $50 million if you
How
really
much,
want
Manny?
50 million.
Okay.
Yep, that's about what SpaceX is charging too.
Yeah, 52 million. I guess you gotta pay a little extra,
So you got to be a billionaire.
You got to be a billionaire, right? So Taber, help us understand how, as a common person, so to speak, if somebody who doesn't have $1 billion in their bank account, I mean, how do you join the unmet or this need that you're creating, this new space that you're creating with the market?
So we're looking at a ticket, $125,000. Actually, some of our research shows we'll get higher sales numbers if the price is higher, because it won't be seen like the cheap solution. So that then, when you look at buying patterns, especially for people who are a bit older, who wouldn't be able to take a rocket ride anyway, the kids home, they've got their nest egg, they're prepared to spend a good chunk of their nest egg on something they've always wanted to do. You actually get down into sort of the $1 million net worth kind of range of people who are willing to pay a good chunk of their nest egg to go do that experience that they've always wanted to do. And then of course it goes up from there. So it's a really interesting thing about space is that there are so many people that grew up going, I always wanted to go to space. And that creates a huge motivation. And, people like me who say, I don't want to have lived my entire life on this planet and never seen it in its context of space. So it's really interesting that the market goes as low as that in terms of sort of liquid assets. But we're finding that seems to be holding. But certainly even well above that, you don't have to be a billionaire to be able to go. And we're also looking at organizations like Space for Humanity that are philanthropic in nature and are buying full capsule rides to send teachers and artists and poets to bring back sort of the message to describe that experience. So you can also get to go now if for it in something like artistry.
That's
So
fascinating.
is your solution regulated? Are you, does the FAA and organizations like that regulate you? And I see you're nodding your head yes. So the follow-up question is, we have entrepreneurs that get a great idea and then they'll say, oh, but they run into realizing that that's regulated and they want to stop. Now, we know some of the greatest entrepreneurs, Richard Branson with Virgin Airways, Elon Musk with Tesla, regulated industries. Tell us a little bit about your approach. What was going through your head when you said, okay, I'm going to have to get this approved by regulators, and how did you get over the fact, why didn't it stop you? Because it stops a lot of entrepreneurs.
Well, so interesting. Regulation was one of the early gates that we had to check off before we decided to go raise money or think about this. Of course, it's difficult if you're being regulated as a certified vehicle, like who's going to take responsibility for the safety of your tourists. That we're regulated, and Virgin Galactic are regulated. So we're regulated as a spacecraft. And so that creates the regulatory environment that allows us to really do this. It's the environment. So we go through the licensing process that Virgin Galactic does or SpaceX does when we get ready to. So yes, in fact, in our case, it's greatly preferable to be regulated because the insurance environment, it sets up the liability environment. It's a much more known environment than to be not regulated. So a regulated operation.
It obviously takes some money to do what you're doing. We have a lot of entrepreneurs that want to bootstrap their businesses, but really good ideas shouldn't be limited by the fact that you want to bootstrap. Tell us a little bit, did you have a background in raising money and how did you go about raising money for meeting this unmet need?
So we've raised money for ventures before, and there is a wide variety of ways and places to raise. So it's a venture firm, Silicon Valley backed is primarily, but we also have a variety of people who to invest just because they really believe in doing. Bootstrapping is you're trying to do. You see bootstrapping very often in lifestyle companies where people want to do this because they want it to be their lifestyle. If you are going to get outside investing to going to some mechanism in some pretty near-term way. So that the trajectory of the company and what you're doing, because you always have to be planning and figuring out how you're going to provide the return on investment. So I don't think one is better than another. Some companies just can't be bootstrapped. But if you decide to go get Silicon Valley investment, then that's comes with the need to exit.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Now you've got a long history, Taber. Both you and Jane in the.
You can tell I've got a long history here.
Manny likes to pick on us.
No,
it's coming, Manny. I can see it.
Yeah, it's coming. Oh yeah, it's absolutely coming. I get it. But we talk about, I met you, I think when you were at Paragon here in Tucson. You have a history with, being a biospherian. And so, we look at a changing economy, changing of the guard with respect to the leadership. Last episode, we talked about how governmental leadership sometimes inhibits growth. Adam and I don't usually get political in this show, very rarely, and I don't want to get political, but I do want to talk about a little bit different side. I mean, Adam mentioned the regulatory side. What other obstacles have you had to face with both your most recent in the Space Perspective and the previous Worldview? What have you had to deal with respect to the environment?
Well, one of the aspects of being a regulated launch is that you have to do, because you're a federally licensed activity. So if the federal government says, yes, you can go do something like launch a big balloon to the edge of space, need that an environmental assessment be conducted. So wherever we launch from requires either a modification or a whole new environmental assessment, which is a long, year or two long activity. And, on the one hand, our environment is greatly improved because of environmental regulation. But boy, it can be something that slows you down. One of the reasons that we do a splashdown versus a land landing is to avoid the need to find and get approved landing locations. And that was in no small measure a regulatory issue. Bureau of Land Management, et cetera, et cetera. So by taking off from a coastal area and splashing down, the need to do these environmental assessments is greatly reduced. But then it turns out, and as we began to look at it, that it also enables to globally expand. Because you think it's hard to find a launch on that southwestern U.S., try Europe or Asia, right? But if you launch from land or even ship and then recover in the water, that opens up the Mediterranean, that opens up the Indian Ocean, Pacific, huge operating. So often the problem you're trying to solve, when you solve it, creates other interesting opportunities you hadn't really identified before. So I think that's sort of the main sort of regulatory thing. The next thing you have to often worry about is insurance and make sure that you're insurable. And often that's a mix of regulation and what companies will do. And they're much more comfortable when there's an overlap in the regulation. So by being regulated as a spacecraft, for example, the insurance requirements are set and the ability for the government to cap your insurance needs is set. So it really sets up a much better environment for insurance than we would otherwise have.
I'm sure the actuaries are just their heads are exploding when you made that phone call. One thing that Adam and I talk about a lot, and in part, is navigating trends. And if you are in business and you make a pivot, that you really understand your value and really understand kind of a little bit yourself as a sort of a mindset as well, and a little bit of courage and other things mixed in. Now you kind of made a big pivot. Maybe I would even take a step back and would say that Worldview made a pivot, and then you made a pivot. Give maybe a little bit of history of all that and how you decided to do that, because that took a lot of gumption, we'll say.
Well, it may have looked like it took a lot of gumption, but it was sort of the obvious thing to do. So here's the story. We started Paragon in Tucson, and Paragon Space Development Corp is still doing great. Grant Anderson is running it, doing a marvelous job. They're growing like crazy, and Paragon serves the space community as a component subsystem supplier, doing life support, environmental control. Great, it's a fantastic company. We began as the space tourism market began to become really apparent with Virgin's getting funding and the like, in sort of the 2009 timeframe. Look at sort of system level space tourism. About 2011, the whole idea of balloon-based tourism began to really take focus. And we started working on that. And in the process of looking at funding, asking around, we got put in touch with Alan Eustace, who wanted to jump on the edge of space. So that was a marvelous project to do, and Alan is an extraordinary person who's on our board actually at Space Perspective. So during the course of that work, we fly these test flights without a person on, and lots of sensors that were telling us exactly what the winds were doing, sort of inadvertently. We had the sensors on because we were supersonically skydiving Alan back down to Earth, so we needed super high-speed sensors. And as we slowly ascended through the stratosphere, those sensors showed us layers of in the atmosphere to be used for navigation that really hadn't been seen before, or certainly not published. So that made us say, wow, if we could very accurately control the altitude of a balloon, we could surf those layers. Well, now those layers are much more understood. Google Loon uses them, other companies are starting to use them. But at the time they weren't. So that made us say, well, if we could do an uncrewed, an unmanned platform that would do all the things you talked about, Manny, of remote sensing and communications, and we'd be able to put a camera at 70,000 feet or 50,000 feet, which would get phenomenal resolution, be able to bounce cell phone, do all this kind of stuff. So that made us say, let's do the unmanned platform first, in small measure, because this is a very, or in large measure, because this is a very time-constrained opportunity. Other people are going to find out about these layers. And also, operationalizing the stratosphere is the big trick for both human flight and unmanned flight. Let's learn about operationalizing the stratosphere first with this unmanned opportunity, and then to human flight. So the pivot really surrounded a high altitude platform opportunity that we didn't know how to do before we got this data. And then with Worldview completely focused on the high altitude platform work now, which is great. Ryan Hartman's doing a super job. They're flying like crazy. It's excellent. We decided to, once we had a new CEO installed, we had management in, really go and look at human flight again, but take all the sort of know-how, the general, and not technology, but just general understanding of how to operationalize the stratosphere, and put together a new ConOps. And one of those innovations was things like splashing down and a series of technologies that enable that. So, what looks like a series of pivots at the time really looks like a series of smart moves, but you have to have the guts to go do it, right?
Yeah, very true.
It's a tremendous story of how you identified the needs, really searched them out to find out your target, get your value proposition, then put together your value delivery system to meet your value proposition, and then learning all the way through the process using external data. It's just a great story. I mean, entrepreneurs should learn from this in a big way. Too many of them come at something like, oh, I want to go make a cake, and so therefore I want to go do my thing, and I'm sure the world will love my thing. And here you had a passion, but you used the outside world to guide your passion, direct your efforts. And that's just fantastic. And it's no wonder you've been successful given the approach you've used. Well,
thank you. I think, it's a very humbling thing to start a company. You work hard to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you are, and who will tell you to your face when you need telling, right? We've managed to do that, and be humbled by the engineering process and be humbled by the environment. You have to hold two things in mind, right? You have to hold that human achievement, the amazing things that human achievement will occur, the faith that you can and will prevail at the end. At the same time, as you know, a really stark, unvarnished look at your real current situation, right? And you can't you can't collapse that sort of dyad between those two things. You have to hold them both at the same time. And that was a really interesting lesson for me, because I kept on trying to like be one or the other. And when I realized that the secret is holding both at the same time, then that really sort of freed me up to really embrace hard feedback, what they thought, at the same time not having that shatter my belief that we will be successful.
Well, it just goes to show good entrepreneurs have good ears. And some people, get into the entrepreneurial business with their ears shut and their mouth wide open, thinking they've got the answer. And what you've been telling us again and again is that you've let the world give you information and direct you, and you've listened very carefully to find your path. And that's a really good lesson for entrepreneurs to have.
Absolutely. Adam, I'd like to close this segment today with sort of explaining the four major trends to Taber, because I believe that as under the layers of these different trends that we follow and we're part of, the space perspective might interweave through some of them in what you're doing.
Awesome.
Adam, would you like to take a shot?
You want me to?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so what we're looking at is that the synthesizing of what's going on in the world today, the trends that are really driving a lot of behavior, pandemic and post, are people want to be mobile, they want to get around the world, they want to do more stuff, they want to have these experiences. So mobility is a big one. The second one is that they operate in an asynchronous method. Having to put everybody in a room at the same time is very difficult and inefficient. So anything that's asynchronous behavior is very helpful. The third one is adding artificial intelligence. If I do something 2 times, I want somebody to observe that I've done it and make it so that I don't have to drive the decision process again and again and again. So building intelligence into the system so that it keeps learning along, the product solution keeps learning along with my behaviors. And the last one is taking advantage of the gig economy. We're never going to go back to being a planet that's driven by the industrial era sort of notions of giant corporations where layer upon layer management, difficult decision making, and holding people close. That's a bygone era. The gig economy with independence of thought and activity and utilizing those resources are really big for us. So those are the 4 big trends right now that we're seeing in 2020 that are going to drive the next decade.
Yeah, I think to go into one of those related to the asynchrony comment, I'm finding that there are tools available now for collaborative engineering that are really going to shake up things like systems engineering. Systems engineering, I have lots of problems with systems engineering, classic systems engineering, but we're finding tools now that are really enabling, a math-based decision and information and design process that more of a narrative process before. So, I would add these, software as tools, everything is software as a service now.
Yep.
Tremendously powerful tools. And what that does is allow smaller teams to do more. When we're building Biosphere, we started off with everybody on drafting boards with pencils, literally. And one weekend, we moved all those drafting boards out and we brought in AutoCAD, this new, fantastic, amazing thing that ran on a 386, right? And changed so much, in many ways, it enabled Biosphere. And you can draw a straight line, tools that enable small teams, and now tools that enable collaboration with small teams through to many of the technologies and innovations that we've seen today.
Yeah. Fantastic.
That's great. Well, really appreciate your time, Taber. This has been a very illustrative conversation, and nice to get your perspective on things, of course.
Thank you, guys. It's been terrific. Great questions and a great conversation. Thank you for helping everybody think about the world as it's changing today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Taber. Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.